Richard Feynman said, "Never confuse education with intelligence. You can have a fee and still be an idiot."
Whoa, some real-life examples of this.
My ex-boyfriend's mother was a linguistics professor and knew over 10 languages. She was also one of the dumbest people I've ever met. Some examples. She believed that in case of emergency, stewardesses catapult out of the plane. She was also convinced donating blood causes some blood disease, and you can die because of it. But my favorite one was when she said her son's orthopedic problems are not a result of a serious injury he had. His knee hurts because he eats too much ketchup. I had a boss who was an engineer who put a couple $100 in change in a bank's pneumatic drive through tube where it got stuck, and they had to use a jackhammer to get it out. He was upset that the bank was charging him for this because he didn't know this would happen. They had large signs saying not to put change in the tubes, including on the tubes themselves. He just filled the thing with random change, not in rolls or anything, like he thought it was a fucking coin star. That's hilarious, unless you were in line behind him. Yep, and it sunk and got stuck underground. Way too heavy for the pneumatic system to carry it to the teller. I have a fate tea, and I work with a bunch of peas. Basically, a lot of them think that because they succeeded in one area, they are an expert in every other area of life. And they always have strong opinions about everything. I think it's also called a patch D syndrome. I think my imposter syndrome cannibalized my fate syndrome. One of the main benefits from my education was to teach me how much I don't know. It's baffling to me that people get confidence to speak on things they don't know anything about just because they're educated. My first call at my first job was in a medical laboratory. There was a doctor who had been in the job for years, and she called saying her computer would not power on. I walked her through some troubleshooting and nothing worked. Is the computer plugged in? Okay. Is the monitor on? Okay. When did the problem start? Type of questions were asked, and she answered them all. I go up to her office, and indeed the computer is plugged into a power strip, which is plugged into itself. Cleaning crew had deep cleaned her office and never plugged anything back in. Doctor plugged the power strip into itself, thinking that as long as it was plugged in, that's all she needed. Part of me wonders if she got the cords mixed up, like she thought what she was plugging in was something other than the power strip. Depending on the length of the cords, I could see it getting lost in the tangle and just plugging it in. I went to 3 years when I felt something was wrong with my arm. It felt like a bug bite day 1, and by day 4 a bungee cord from my elbow to my wrist. 3 doctors said it was a skin irritation or dermatitis. I kept telling them something was wrong. I have no medical degree. I work in property management. Day 5, I walked into another air and said, I don't care if I have to pay out of pocket or sit here all night, but something is wrong with my arm. Finally, after many rude looks and comments, I was given an ultrasound of my arm, then rushed to MRI, then told I was being admitted. A 3 blood clot in my upper arm, 2 in my chest area, and 1 had passed my lung already. Diagnosed with factor 2 gene mutation, 22 days later, blood clotting disorder. Damn, good for you being persistent. That is pretty wild that they missed that. I'm glad you did finally get a proper diagnosis. Did you call back to the other places to tell them what asses they were? My wife's stepfather was a chemist who currently has diabetes. One night he went to the air because his blood sugar was dangerously high. He claimed he was eating well. He normally doesn't, so there's no reason why his blood sugar was high. In his car was a 2-liter bottle of ginger ale mixed in with grape juice. He said that the 2 cancelled their sugars out, and we didn't know what we were talking about because he was a chemist and he knows how to combine things. Holy fuck, that is insane. It is. With respect to sugar, unless you're doing a low sugar juice, you've got the same numbers as soda because he doesn't drink diet. But when I was hearing this, I'm just trying to imagine the taste. Ugh. This happened earlier this year, and he still argues he's right. Like, dude, you add a vodka kicker to a margarita, does it suddenly cancel out the alcohol? Or is a Long Island iced tea no longer potent because you cancelled everything else out? I'm no scientist, but I've added my sodas together when I was younger, and I never had suddenly regular tasting water. Edit. It's been shown to me by many Redditors that I am incorrect in that I held onto a disproven opinion that the diet soda sweetener had an increased link to cancer. I admit I am wrong, though it never stopped me from drinking Diet Dr. Pepper. Like he might be a chemist, but that doesn't mean he knows anything useful about diabetic biochemistry. You see this with engineers a lot too. Engineers a lot too. Engineers will be like, I know X because I am an engineer. No, you're a mechanical engineer who works in design and finite element analysis. You do not have the same level of clarity on nuclear reactor maintenance. Your sad devotion to that ancient religion hasn't given you the clairvoyance needed to locate those stolen play, choking noises. If an ancient religion was giving my boss magical telekinetic powers, you'd better believe I would not be giving them sass. Ah yes, the ancient JD religion from the bygone era of nearly 25 years ago. Cognitive dissonance. It's actually insane what people can convince themselves of when they really want something. Edit. I used the wrong word. Others pointed out I should have said confirmation bias, not cognitive dissonance, and they are correct. I don't know anyone who wants ginger ale mixed with grape juice. Somebody's never known the joy of a good Gringa jail. Somebody should go to Gringa jail. And here I am, having not gone to college for chemistry or any field of science I'm interested in, because I believe I'm not intelligent enough to be any kind of scientist. While I feel like I'm not intelligent, I also kinda wish I was dumber so I could just blindly go into things that other people do and seem to end up just fine low. I actually read an article, long time ago, that stated dumb people are more successful than intelligent people for this very reason. An intelligent person can envision the difficulties of pursuing something and as a result go fuck that. A dumb person can't and will just plummet headfirst into something hoping for the best. I didn't know that Steve Jobs was a chemist, but for real Steve Jobs, by all regarded as one of the most brilliant marketers of all time, and when he was diagnosed with a more treatable form of pancreatic cancer, he said, "Fuck modern medicine, my organ that regulated blood sugar level. I'll just eat nothing but sugar, fruit, and that'll cure my struggling organ, like someone with liver disease giving up water and committing only to drink beer." His stupidity in one area led to his death, despite his brilliance in other areas. He also bought a house in another state to jump the organ donation queue and killed that donor organ too with his stupid food diet. I'm literally laying in the IQ at the moment with a fresh kidney transplant, and anybody who does this shit should be banned by honors. I'm so incredibly grateful to the woman who died for my gift of life, and I can't wait to express my gratitude to her surviving family. I mean, he was banned from life by pancreatic cancer shortly after, so it's kind of a non-issue as far as repeat offense go. May have done, but the key thing was having a private jet standing by. The key thing with transplant surgery is how quickly can you get there. The shelf life of organs is short, and Jobs had the ability to get anywhere in the continental U's for a transplant within 6 hours. That bumps you way up the list over someone who has a job and would take days to get to a hospital equipped for the op. And yes, he was an utter wanker for taking organs that someone else could have lived with when his condition was pretty easily curable using modern medicine rather than pseudoscience. I was at a keg party at college and the gravity keg was set up. Someone complained that the beer was not flowing, so I checked that the keg was still almost full. Turns out someone closed the air intake on top. I opened the intake and poured myself a beer. Problem solved. A few minutes later, someone else complains the beer is out. I told them the keg was full a few minutes ago, and it was a tap problem that I fixed. They told me they just came from the keg. I go back to the keg and find the intake was closed again. Opened it and poured the young lady who said it was empty a beer. As she is leaving, my suitmate comes in and goes to the intake and closes it. Now my suitmate is a straighter student who gets all as mostly due to his photographic memory. Back to the keg. So I tell him that he needs to leave the intake open to let air in to displace the beer coming out of the lower tank. He then proceeds to tell me that since the beer's carbonated air is not needed to replace the liquid volume lost when the beer is dispensed. So I asked him 2 questions. If it is not needed, why is there the upper tap, and does he really think the amount of gas the carbonation gives off in a glass of beer is equal to the volume of the liquid beer? He thought for a few seconds and his only response was, "I have a 4.0. What is your GPAR?" Then he walked away. I seriously fucking hope that was not a real response. It seems legit. I've met enough people that if you criticize one thing, they take it as blanket statement about the entire subject. You know, it's 20 def outside. Timmy really should be wearing a jacket while he's sitting at the bus stop. Or you think I'm just a terrible person, huh? No, I think Timmy should be wearing a jacket. You know, it's 20 def outside. Timmy really should be wearing a jacket while he's sitting at the bus stop. Oh, you think I'm just a terrible person, huh? No, I think Timmy should be wearing a jacket. This is such a good example for a particular type of weaponized fragility. Ha ha. I hope your response was awesome. Your Jeeper matches your Ike. Peter Duisberg, molecular biologist who works as a researcher at UC Berkeley and has an otherwise stellar career and well known for his work, became an AIDS denialist, claiming there's no link between HIV and AIDS. Led countless people down the rabbit hole, including many who were HIV positive. These individuals ended up infecting others and refusing antiretroviral therapy. This included an AIDS denialist activist named Christine Maggiore, who infected her infant through breastfeeding, thinking, hey, it's not a big deal, it's just if it doesn't cause AIDS. Kerry Mullis, who won the Nobel Prize for inventing Kia, also questioned the link between HIV and AIDS. I chatted with him on a plane once, and he was indeed pretty dumb edit. Dumb in many ways, but clearly unique and smart in others. I'm not here to bash Kerry Mullis, because poor's cool as hell, and he seemed cool in some ways too. Met him once after a lecture at the university I was working at. It was amazing to me how he stuck to his mantra of just a surfer dude researcher who single-handedly conceived of and conveniently left out the dozens of other scientists and technicians who helped with the preceding work and subsequent refinement of the process. Yeah, it was funny because when I met him, I was seated with him and another scientist, on a plane to Boston, of course. I was telling them both about some stuff I did with a fancy, at the time, version of Kia, and he just listened and then talked about surfing mostly, and I was thinking, who is this bozo? When I got off the plane, the other scientist was like, it's not every day you meet a Nobel laureate. And I was like, what? Who was that? And that's when he told me who it was. He had gotten Mullis' card and gave it to me, and I still have it somewhere. Also, just a surfer dude researcher who single-handedly conceived of Pia during an acid trip, so it kinda still tracked. That's a pretty interesting encounter. I had a similar, though not as impressive. One on a place to East Africa. This lovely woman next to me was asking why I was traveling there, so I told her that I was living there, doing NI-funded research. Before we got off the plane, she handed me her card. She was the top CTK representative in the country we were traveling to.
Good contact her.
On a similar note, there are a whole bunch of American academics of Chomsky's vintage who are Cambodian genocide deniers. They think it's an American imperialist lie meant to make a communist regime look bad. I worked it for a hospital. I was speaking to a doctor who forgot his password. While he was spelling his name phonetically over the phone, he said Z as in xylophone. Needless to say, my eyebrows raised. I work in software development for a major chain of hospitals. The executives asked me to make a substantial new change to a product owned by McKesson. Them just change the colors. It's simple. My teenager could do it. Me, I can make the request to the vendor. Them, that's ridiculous. You just need to go in there and change it. Out of spite, I made the request to the vendor, and they came back with a quote that was more than 2 liver transplants. The executive told my co I was being difficult and couldn't perform simple tasks. He literally did not understand that vendor software was different than a Wix website. When I worked in hospital administration, I was told I needed to code up a game for iOS and Android from scratch. In 2 weeks, this direction came from an MD.AC level executive and a lawyer. At the time, I had no coding skills to speak of. I was just a young person who liked computers and could do Hedden. I didn't even work in it. The conversation with them about how that would be impossible was interesting. Why did they want you to do that? Dance, monkey, dance. There had been some new regulatory requirements that they wanted to train everyone on, and they thought a mobile game would be the best way to go about it. But you know how to create a line graph in Excel, and the other day you fixed my computer when it crashed. Surely developing a working mobile game can't be much different than that. More than 2 liver transplants, we rarely will measure in anything other than metric. I worked with a girl that graduated from Brown. She would never shut up about it. Always Brown this and Brown that. I went to a state school, and it was apparent that she looked down on anyone that didn't attend an Ivy League school. So one day she was doing that, and I couldn't stop myself. I said something like, oh, you went to Brown, and yet here we are together in the same place, doing the same job. I had someone on my ship who wouldn't shut up about being older and college educated. She was 3 ranks below me. She had no grasp on the concept of experience. Yay, I have a degree, but if someone has more experience, I will always listen to that for sure. Maybe it's because I have a blue-collar background. I know some that just won't listen. It never works out well for them. Mate, you cannot just end it there without telling us what her response was. That's just not fair. It did make her pause, which was a feat unto itself, but that's all. Nothing could shut her up. She was also the kind of person that would complain she was being repressed when anyone at all had a disagreement about how something should be handled. Quite possibly the least pleasant person I've ever known. I see, but have you considered this point? She went to Brown. I worked for a statistician who had a fascie in statistics and was dumb as a post. Otto, I worked with this really smart guy who happened to have a PhD, and as he said it, all that means is I did the work for a PhD. I worked with a climate scientist who could analyze climate data like nobody's business. But if you wanted him to do literally anything else, you had to hold his hand the entire time. Zero common sense, too. The senior staff at that office idolized him because of the Feiji after his name, but one time he was in a car accident in a work vehicle. Also his fault. And I asked for a copy of the police report for insurance purposes, and he said he didn't get one because I thought you handled that. Why would I, who was not present at the time of the accident, have the police report that was written at the time of the accident? The other guy that you ran into has one? Otto, I worked with this really smart guy who happened to have a PhD, and as he said it, all that means is I did the work for a PhD. This is almost exactly what my friend with a PhD says. He also abhors it when I call him doctor. He doesn't want people thinking he's an vowel. Even though a PhD is a doctorate, it is literally describing a doctor. I know we live in a world where anything can mean anything and no one cares about the etymology. My college roommate, smartest person I've ever met, spent nearly an hour trying to shove a desk back into the corner of our room at an angle. She wouldn't listen to me because, in her words, she got this. After she finally gave up, I walked over, pulled the desk out completely and straightened it with the wall and pushed it back in. One movement, no struggle. Many a time we had where I'd realize she might be the smart one, but I've got more common sense. My ex-wife with a PhD in neuroscience, driving my car around with a handbrake on calling me to ask about the noise and smell. Not quite piped, but I was at a party in the UK, full of med students, and stereotypically, everyone was off their face drunk. Well, some guy fell over and broke his collarbone and immediately got rushed by a dozen of them all fussing and asking him the same questions over and going through the checklist. Half an hour later, and he's still on the couch in pain, and I go in to ask if anybody knows why the ambulance is taking so long. Nobody had an answer because nobody had called one. A party full of medical students hadn't called an ambulance or made any transport arrangements for a guy in severe pain with a broken clavicle. Idiot. That's actually super common in emergencies when there's a group of any kind. One of the first things you learn in a lifeguard certification course is to identify a single person to instruct to call 911. Never just yell out someone, call 911, or assume that it's been done because everyone in the group is assuming someone else did it already. It's not necessarily that everyone forgot about it, just that everyone assumed it was the logical first step that someone else would have taken already. Singling somebody out tends to work because in an emergency there are 50 random people all wanting to do something to help, but none of them willing to take charge of the situation in fear of fucking it up. Single someone out and you will have taken charge for them and given them something to do that it's hard to be bad at, so they'll do it. Yep, you, red shirt, call 911 blue shirt, get me towels jacket, first aid kit under the sink. This is exactly why they teach you in American Red Cross first aid courses to point at a particular person and shout at them, call 911. It is a well-known psychological issue that people will just assume someone else is doing it if you don't single them out and tell them to do it. Edit. A word. Sounds like one of those situations where students or newbies in a field try to apply their newfound skills to any possible situation. I've seen it with C students, with pole science students and others. It's reminiscent of an oft-reposted joke about a physicist, an engineer and a programmer trying to fix a car. There's also a saying that when your only tool is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. It's the standard joke for anyone who takes Psychology 101 to start diagnosing all of their friends and family members with mental illnesses based on reading one chapter of an intro book. I had a professor for higher mathematics who had real difficulties figuring out how to extract a cup of coffee from the vending machine. Bless him. I had a student job doing it for the classroom equipment at my college. My job wouldn't have existed if having a PhD meant you could figure out technology. I once was a student resource coordinator at a university. Once a computer science professor was having trouble with the computer and projector displaying his presentation. The whole class laughed when I asked him if he checked his connections, and it turned out his computer wasn't plugged in. I once had the privilege of telling a $300 shower-it consultant that the reason his presentation screen wasn't working was that he'd unplugged it to charge his laptop. I work with lawyers, and I'm convinced they trade every other brain cell they have for their law degree. I have gotten phone calls from lawyers asking me how percentages work. So we should ask for 40 million in damages. Thanks. Sounds like a relative of mine. A PhD in veterinary medicine by 30 has worked on genetic research in dogs and developed a new technique on measuring canine metabolism. Same person spent two whole lessons of driving school trying to figure out how the steering wheel works. Edit. To be clear, I don't think she's an idiot. The comment just reminded me of her. Sometimes I think she just processes things differently from most people. I have a PhD and I am an idiot in most respects. All it takes to get a PhD is to be really good at or persistent in doing research in one narrow area of study. Edit. So several commenters pointed out that I simplified things too much. A PhD also requires hard work, luck, and some basic competence in a topic. But that doesn't preclude one from being completely clueless in other aspects of life. The best quote I've heard about this is they don't give PhDs to the smartest people, they give them to the most stubborn. True. I quit my fate. Everyone felt so sorry for me. They shouldn't. It was a great life move. The thing I learned most in academia, an area of learning, is don't get into academia. Europe. I left my pape behind and took the Mies. My advisor was an unhappy, abusive man who thought his co-workers in the department were morons and treated them as such, and encouraged his graduate students to treat their peers that way. I went from 109 tilbs to 206 tilbs during grade school from depression eating. COVID didn't help, because there was no way you could win in that lab. Successes were because you got lucky. Failures were because you were incompetent, and not because you were using equipment from the 50s or reagents older than you. Leaving was the best thing I could have done. Now I have a nice guff job, make more than any of the people in that lab, and have lost 50 of the 7 tilbs I gained. I quit mine, seeking CADE in musicology, when I realized that 1, the only thing it was good for was as a credential for college teaching, and 2, I loathed teaching, fumbled around for a couple of years and wound up in software development, a much better career for me. Hard agree. Source. I'm stubborn. Dr. Stubborn. I once spilled some food on the floor as I was plating it up. So I very carefully used a paper towel to wipe up that droplet of sauce, then yeeted my entire dinner and plate into the bin. I spent a good 5 seconds staring at the paper in my hand, wondering how I was going to eat it, at which point husbando appeared and said, "You have a pate." At least once a month, I will open an oatmeal packet, dump the contents into the garbage, and throw the empty package into the bowl, then just stare at what I've done. Once, when I'd worked weeks of long hours on a big project, I got home and dropped my keys on the front stoop of my house. I was so tired, I just couldn't process this turn of events. Oh great, now I'm locked out. Several seconds passed before my brain came back online. It occurred to me that I could just, pick them up. No advanced degree, but I still felt like a moron. Getting a pitched is knowing more and more about less and less, until you know absolutely everything about nothing. I work with medical doctors all the time for work. Doctors are some of the dumbest smart people I have ever met. Dr. Carson Ice was legitimately an incredibly gifted surgeon, but also is apparently totally crazy. As someone who works security in a hospital, I can say a good 90% of the doctors there are smart but lack any type of common sense, and sometimes I wonder how they function on a day-to-day basis. Edit. I also forgot to mention I'm almost 2 years in a relationship with a pediatric cardiologist, and it's as shocking at home as it is with the ones I work with Mayo, but I can't say it's boring. If pop culture has taught us anything, it is that they spend most of their non-doctoring time discussing their sex lives and feuding the janitorial staff. He's near. I work in pension administration, and one of our clients is one of the best universities in the world, and I 100% feel this comment. Some of the professors I deal with have clearly graduated college, done a PhD, and then gone straight into teaching, and they just have no understanding of how the world works outside the framework of a university. The one that really sticks with me, though, is that part of the retirement paperwork we send out contains an explanation of how the early retirement factors work. It says something like if you retire early, your benefit is reduced by X% per month to reflect the fact it will be paid for a longer time. So for a hypothetical accrued benefit of $1,000, if you retire at age 55, your actual payment amount would be Dutty Dude straight up called in to ask why his actual payment wasn't $1,000 since he didn't retire early, so according to this page, it should be $1,000. I'm just like, bro, you never heard the word hypothetical before? This is basically what The Best and the Brightest by David Halberstam is about. It tells the story of how the Kennedy and Johnson administrations got the United States into the Vietnam War, and it particularly zeroed in on Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. He kept escalating the conflict at every turn, and if you questioned him, he could bury you in data showing that the US was winning the war and the Defense Department just needed more troops and more money to put us over the top. I'm grossly oversimplifying a great book, but that's the gist of it. A great companion piece to the book is a documentary called The Fog of War by Errol Morris. It's a one-on-one interview with Robert McNamara filmed near the end of his life, where he ruminates on the lessons he's learned. After watching it, 90% of people come away from the experience thinking that McNamara is a particularly intelligent and sagacious man, even though there's a mountain of evidence showing that that's not the case. I think the problem was the data they were getting was showing they were winning, but they weren't interpreting the data they got correctly. Like the Dodd was getting told they killed X number of Viet Cong and the numbers were increasing, but how did they know they were Viet Cong? Did that mean that their increased efforts were resulting in more defeats for the Viet Cong, or were more Nva were getting into the ROV, or more ROV citizens were turning into Viet Cong? Whereas commanders being pressured to get Kias, so they were reporting they had more Kias than they actually were. It was just a failure by a data guy, McNamara, to understand what the data was saying. I have been told that idiots are running the world, but if that's true, I would have thought I would be a little higher up. My ex had a real lack of knowledge and common sense when it came to children. She's currently completing her FAST in biochemistry and molecular biology. She was confused, though, when I said I couldn't go out after putting my toddler to bed as I had no one to babysit. In her mind, once my daughter was asleep, she no longer needed anyone here to take care of her. I chalked it up to cultural differences and never being around children. Eventually, though, our opinions on raising kids differed too much, and I had to end things for my daughter's sake. Worked at a tech company, was made team-led. One of our team members was a PhD in astrophysics. He would ping me constantly for how to do things that we had well documented. How to install certain programs, how to gain access to servers or code repository. Literally, we would sit in Zoom calls together, and I would just read the instructions out loud and watch him do them. I was utterly confused as to how he could breathe by himself. Dr. Ben Carson, one of the most skilled neurosurgeons alive, thinking that the Egyptian pyramids were used to store grain. This guy operated on the brain of a fetus while it was still in the womb. He was the first in human history to ever do that. I wonder if he got killed and replaced by a clone sometimes. That's actually amazing. He's genuinely one of the most impressive people of his generation. He only put all his skill points into one particular thing. 9,000 dexterity, 2 intelligence, 0 charisma. Yep, I had to read his life story in school way before he got into politics, and he is genuinely really good at his job, and his life story is interesting. I didn't realize how little he knew about other topics until he ran for president. Carrie Mullis won a Nobel Prize in chemistry. He also denied global warming, thought that it doesn't cause AIDS, believed in astrology, and claimed to have met a glowing, talking raccoon that may or may not have been an alien. A doctor telling me my 6-month-old couldn't have strep because she was infant, and taking her to the because she was getting worse and no urgent cares were open, and finding out she had strep. Got one better, psych nurse here. Got a fax on a patient at a local for possible psychiatric admission. frequent flyer of ours on my unit. Her blood pressure was through the roof. She had facial drooping on one side, body paralysis on one side, and slurred speech. Anyone with a hint of healthcare knowledge will tell you that those are classic signs of an active stroke. So I called the thinking maybe they meant to send the fax to our medical unit and sent it to us by mistake. Nope. I said, you do know she's having a stroke with those symptoms, right? The nurse proceeds to tell me that the doc thinks she is faking those symptoms because she has a significant psychiatric history. I said, so you think she's faking a blood pressure of 280,165 and body paralysis? She hung up on me. Our psychiatrist calls the back on speaker to find out what's going on. A doctor tells her patient is faking these symptoms because, and I quote, schizophrenics cannot have strokes. Our psychiatrist asked him here. He went to med school because they owed him a refund. Did she finally get the care she needed? I hope you guys reported that doc to whomever handles that in the hospital. Man, as if that poor woman doesn't have enough to deal with, being accused of faking a serious and potentially fatal medical condition and not being treated for it is unconscionable. I believe she did. She has been on our unit several times since, and I asked her about it once, and she said they transported her to a bigger hospital for care. I haven't seen any residual side effects of a stroke the last few times I've had her as a patient. But sadly I've seen things like this happen a lot with psych patients. This case was the most extreme, but I've had patients come to the for chest pain, and the providers chalk it up to anxiety because they have a psych history, only for them to get to our unit. And I call a rapid response, and he call a rapid response. Patient is having an active heart attack. We have come a long way when it comes to stigma around mental health and those affected by it, but we still have a long way to go. I know many people in the science field that conduct double-blind, randomized controlled experiments in the lab and then go home and check their horoscope. I don't need to listen to you. I have credential. If you aren't willing to consider novel information because of the messenger, sorry, you're an idiot. In a personal note, my wife was a fate candidate when we moved in together. Early on we went to a party, and when we got home, I told her I felt inadequate because I was the least educated person in every room and felt kinda dumb listening to them all go on about things I had no idea about. She said to me they each know the most about some little thing they just got their fay about, some gene mutation, or how some molecule interacts in some rarefied environment. But apart from that, they're all just regular people who can't figure out how to match their socks or talk to a member of the opposite sex. She said, you're one of the most curious people I know. Your library is bigger and more diverse than anyone else I know, and you've actually read them. You ask questions and talk to everybody, and have actual things to talk to them about because you know about things they're interested in. Now she's an impeached, and all our friends are doctors of one kind or another, and I'm still the least educated person at the party. But now I can see people are just people, and yes, you can be super smart about one thing or another, and still buy a fuck-up in the real world. It's why I'm more important to be a good, kind person who does what you say you'll do than the smartest kid in class. At least that's how we raised our kids anyway. British historian David Starkey, he is only a historian in regards to Tudor England, 1485-1603. Other than that, he is a complete idiot, especially when it comes to politics. My uncle is smart as fuck, multiple master's degrees in education and science, constantly wins awards for his teaching and high averages from his students. Tell me why this idiot needed me to remind him how to make raiment several times over. Not a feat. But I know someone who has a master's in finance and thinks everyone should just own a house. I was like, how are they gonna pay for it? He was like, they should work hard. I couldn't stop laughing. To get a doctorate, you need to know absolutely nothing about a wide range of subjects. Dr. Oz. He really went to Harvard. He really is a university professor. He really did pioneer several cardiac surgery techniques. Also, he promoted hydroxychloroquine to fight COVID after reading about it on the internet. I don't mention the obvious scams that he flogs on his TV show because I don't think he really believes in them. I think it's an act he puts on just to scam gullible people. Well, that's the thing. Not sure how much of Oz is really Dr. Is Idiot when it comes to non-scope of expertise and how much is scammers gonna scam me all. Oz is a grifter, plain and simple. My great uncle is a brilliant engineer but has zero social awareness. If I tell him a joke about, say, dogs, he won't laugh, but he'll tell you about how dogs' evolution mirrors humanity's and how our species are symbiotic or some shit. Then we explain to him that it was a joke. He'll replay it in his mind and then laugh. Edit. I appreciate all the online diagnoses, but he's absolutely not autistic.